The story opens in the year 1912 with a sweeping view of Ashbury Heights Orphanage, a towering Gothic structure of gray stone and wrought iron gates perched on a hill overlooking a sleepy, prosperous town. The building is imposing, yet it carries an air of faded grandeur, its once elegant architecture now softened by ivy creeping up the walls and the distant laughter of children echoing through its halls. Inside, the orphanage is a place of strict order and quiet unease. The headmistress, Miss Eleanor Voss, is a stern but elegant woman in her 50s, her hair pinned tightly back, her dark eyes watchful. She moves through the corridors with the quiet authority of someone who demands obedience, her long skirts whispering against the wooden floors. The children, dressed in simple, identical uniforms, know better than to misbehave in her presence. Yet, despite the rigid atmosphere, life continues. In the sunlit courtyard, a group of 5 children form their own little family amidst the coldness of the institution. There's Thomas, the oldest at 12, sharp-eyed and protective, Eliza, quick-witted and curious, always with a book tucked under her arm, Samuel, sturdy and brave, the first to dare the others into mischief, Margaret, gentle and dreamy, who hums to herself when she's nervous, and little Peter, only 6, who clings to the others like a shadow, his wide eyes always searching the dark corners of the orphanage as if expecting something to emerge. At first glance, it seems like any other orphanage, strict but survivable. But there are cracks in the illusion. Strange things happen when the sun sets. Whispers slither through the halls when no one is there. Some of the children claim to have seen a tall, faceless figure lingering at the edge of their vision, only for it to vanish when they turn their heads. Others wake screaming from nightmares they can't remember, their sheets damp with sweat. The staff dismisses it as childish imagination, but the children know better. Something is wrong in Ashbury Heights. And then, one evening, as the first frost of autumn creeps over the windows, little Peter tugs on Thomas's sleeve and whispers, "He watches me when I sleep." The words hang in the air, heavy with dread. And so begins the unraveling. The days grow shorter, the nights colder. The orphanage settles into its winter rhythms, but an unspoken tension lingers among the children, especially after Peter's whispered confession. He has grown quieter, his usual laughter replaced by nervous glances toward darkened doorways. The others try to reassure him, passing it off as nightmares, but even Thomas feels it. The sensation of being watched when no one is there. Then, one morning, Peter is gone. His bed is neatly made, his few belongings, a carved wooden horse, a frayed blanket, left untouched. The headmistress announces at breakfast that he has been adopted, her voice smooth as polished stone. The staff nods along, their faces unreadable. But the children know better. Peter would never have left without saying goodbye. He wouldn't have abandoned his toy horse, the one Samuel whittled for him last Christmas. Eliza, ever the skeptic, waits until the others are distracted before slipping into Miss Voss's office. She rifles through the papers on the desk, her fingers trembling. But there's no adoption record, no letter from a happy family. Just a single line in the ledger. Subject, removed. Processed. The ink is fresh. That night, the remaining 4 gather in the dim glow of a smuggled candle, their voices hushed. Thomas insists they're overreacting. Maybe Peter really was adopted in a hurry. But Margaret, usually so soft-spoken, shakes her head. "I saw something last night," she admits. "A shadow. It wasn't human. It was waiting." The words sink like stones. Then, from the hallway, a sound. A slow, deliberate creak of floorboards. Not the scurrying of mice or the settling of the old house. Something heavier. something moving with purpose. The candle flickers, and for the briefest moment, just beyond the door, the silhouette of a tall, impossibly thin figure blots out the light from the hall. Then, nothing. The children sit frozen, their breath held. The silence stretches, suffocating. When dawn comes, they pretend nothing happened. But the truth is already taking root in their minds. Peter didn't leave Ashbury Heights. Something took him. The orphanage no longer feels like a place of refuge. It has become a cage, its walls humming with secrets. Days pass in a suffocating blur after Peter's disappearance, the remaining children moving through their routines like ghosts. Miss Voss watches them more closely now, her sharp eyes lingering a moment too long whenever they whisper among themselves. The staff, usually indifferent, seem tense, quick to scold, quicker to look away. Thomas can't shake the image of that shadow outside their door. He waits until the dead of night, when the orphanage groans with the weight of its own history, and slips from his cot. Eliza is already awake, her fingers clutching the edge of her blanket. She doesn't ask where he's going. She follows. They creep through the labyrinth of hallways, their bare feet silent against the cold wood. The headmistress's office is locked, but Thomas has learned a thing or two from Samuel. A bent hairpin, a twist of the wrist, and the door yields with a soft click. Moonlight spills through the window, painting the room in shades of silver and ink. Eliza rifles through the desk drawers, her breath hitching when her fingers brush against a hidden compartment. Inside lies a ledger, its pages brittle with age. Names stretch back decades, each marked with the same chilling notation, processed. But it's the last entry that stops them cold. Peter Whitaker. Subject prepared. The offering accepted. Eliza's hands tremble. Thomas feels something dark and heavy settle in his chest. Then, voices, footsteps. They barely have time to shove the ledger back before the door swings open. It's not Miss Voss. It's Mr. Hargrove, the groundskeeper, his hulking frame blocking the exit. His smile doesn't reach his eyes. Children shouldn't poke around where they don't belong, he murmurs. They expect punishment, a beating, perhaps, or confinement to the cellar. But Hargrove only watches them, his gaze unreadable, before stepping aside. Go back to bed, he says, before you see something you can't forget. They run, but not before Eliza notices the symbol etched into the wall behind him, an eclipsed sun, its edges jagged like teeth. The air in the orphanage has grown thick with the weight of unspeakable things. Thomas and Eliza share their discovery with Samuel and Margaret in hushed, frantic whispers, their voices barely louder than the rustling of rats in the walls. The ledger's grim entries, the groundskeeper's ominous warning, the symbol of the eclipsed sun. None of it makes sense, and yet it makes too much sense. The children realize with dawning horror that they are not just orphans. They are lambs in a pen, waiting for slaughter. That night, Samuel leads them to the cellar, a place strictly forbidden, where the air smells of damp earth and something older, something metallic. The flickering lantern in his hand casts long, trembling shadows that seem to twist unnaturally against the stone walls. Margaret hesitates at the base of the stairs, her fingers clutching Eliza's sleeve. We shouldn't be here, she breathes. But Samuel, ever the bold one, presses on. Behind a stack of mildewed crates, Samuel finds what he's been searching for, a loose brick. He pries it free, revealing a narrow passage, its entrance slick with something dark and sticky. The smell is worse here. Rot and candle wax and something sweetly foul, like spoiled incense. The passage opens into a hidden chamber, its walls lined with crumbling frescoes of robed figures bowing before a towering, faceless shape. At the center of the room stands an altar, its surface stained a deep, unnatural black. Scattered around it are the remnants of old rituals, burnt-out candles, dried herbs, and small, brittle bones that look too delicate to belong to animals. Eliza's lantern light catches on something half buried in the dust. A journal, its pages brittle with age. She opens it carefully, her breath catching as she reads aloud. The words are archaic, chilling. The first covenant demands payment in innocence. The hollow one feeds, and in return, the land thrives. The children must be given willingly, their fear a sacrament. Margaret whimpers. Samuel's fists clench. Thomas feels the truth settle over them like a burial shroud. Ashbury Heights Orphanage was never meant to save children. It was built to feed something. And then, a sound. A slow, dragging footstep from the passage behind them. The lantern flickers. Something is coming. The lantern trembles in Eliza's hand as the sound echoes through the hidden chamber. A slow, deliberate scraping, like something dragging itself across the stone floor of the passageway. The children freeze, their breath trapped in their throats. Margaret's fingers dig into Samuel's arm hard enough to leave bruises, but he doesn't pull away. Even he, usually so fearless, feels the primal terror crawling up his spine. Thomas is the first to move. He snatches the journal from Eliza's grip and shoves it into his coat, then grabs the lantern. "Run!" he hisses. They don't argue. They scramble back through the narrow passage, their shoulders brushing against damp walls that seem to press in tighter the farther they go. Behind them, the dragging sound grows louder, accompanied now by a wet, rattling breath. Something alive, but not human. Not anymore. Eliza is the last to climb out of the passage. As she turns to push the brick back into place, she glimpses a shape in the darkness. A towering silhouette, its limbs too long, its head a smooth, featureless plane where a face should be. The faceless man. For a heartbeat, their eyes meet, though it has no eyes to meet hers. Then the lantern gutters, plunging them into near darkness. Eliza stifles a scream and shoves the brick closed with trembling hands. They don't stop running until they reach the dormitory, their lungs burning, their nightclothes clinging to their skin with cold sweat. Samuel bolts the door behind them, though they all know it won't matter. If the faceless man wants in, a lock won't stop it. Margaret curls into herself on her cot, her voice a broken whisper. It was waiting for us. It knew we'd find that room. Thomas clutches the stolen journal to his chest, like a shield. Then we know what it wants, he says, and we're not going to let it take anyone else. But outside in the hall, the floorboards creak under an impossible weight, and then a single hollow knock on the door. The knock at the door hangs in the air like a death sentence. For 3 heartbeats, no one moves. No one breathes. Then, silence. The oppressive kind, thick enough to choke on. Thomas forces himself to step forward, his hand hovering over the doorknob. Eliza shakes her head violently, her eyes wide with warning, but he grips the handle anyway. 1, 2, 3. He yanks the door open. The hallway is empty. Relief floods through them, until Margaret whimpers and points at the floor. A trail of wet, black footprints leads away from their door and toward the stairs. The cellar. They're hurting us, Samuel realizes. Eliza's hands tremble as she clutches the journal. The answers must be inside. How to stop the ritual, how to break the cycle. But the only way out is through the horror waiting below. Thomas meets each of their eyes. We go together, and if we don't make it, we make sure no one else disappears. Margaret finishes, her voice steadier than it's ever been. Armed with nothing but the lantern and their desperation, they descend into the belly of the orphanage. The air grows colder with each step, their breath fogging in the dark. The cellar door stands ajar, the darkness beyond pulsing like a living thing. Miss Voss stands before the altar, her usual crisp attire replaced by a tattered black robe. The groundskeeper and 2 other staff members flank her, their faces slack with eerie devotion. Candles flicker despite the absence of wind, their flames casting monstrous shadows that writhe against the walls. And behind them, the faceless man. Taller than any human, its featureless head tilted in grotesque curiosity. Its long fingers twitch as if already savoring their fear. Miss Voss smiles. "You were always the clever ones," she sighs, as though disappointed. "But the offering must be made." Thomas steps forward, the journal burning in his grip. "We know what you've done. We know what you feed." The faceless man cocks its head. Eliza finds her voice. "And we're not afraid anymore." A lie. They're terrified. But it's the kind of terror that sparks defiance. Samuel lunges first, knocking over the candles. The flames catch the ancient draperies, spreading hungrily. Miss Voss shrieks, her composure shattered as the fire illuminates the horror in the room. The tiny bones embedded in the walls, the rusted knives on the altar, the way the faceless man's form ripples at the edges, as if not fully in this world. Margaret grabs Eliza's hand. "The journal. What does it say about stopping it?" Eliza flips through the crumbling pages as chaos erupts around them. Then, there, a single passage scrawled in desperate handwriting. The hollow one fears the names of the taken. Thomas understands first. He begins shouting them, every name from the ledger, every child stolen, Peter, Alice, James, dozens more. The faceless man reels back as if struck. The walls tremble. The groundskeeper howls as the flames reach him, but the children don't stop. They scream the names louder, their voices raw with grief and fury. Miss Voss tries to flee, but the fire blocks her path. "You don't understand," she wails. "The town, the crops, everything depends on this." Samuel spits at her feet. "Then let it burn." The faceless man lets out a sound that isn't a scream, isn't a roar, but something far worse. The noise of a starving thing denied its meal. Its form begins to unravel, the edges peeling away like smoke in the wind. As the orphanage collapses around them, the children run, not toward salvation, but through it. The heat at their backs a reminder of the evil they've left behind. They don't look back, not even when the whispers follow them into the night. The world outside the burning orphanage should have felt like freedom, but the night air carried something worse. The scent of charred flesh and the lingering presence of something not entirely banished. Thomas, Eliza, Samuel, and Margaret stumbled into the overgrown garden, their bodies trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. Behind them, Ashbury Heights roared with flames, its skeletal frame collapsing in on itself like a dying beast. But the firelight played tricks on their eyes. Shadows moved where they shouldn't. The wind carried whispers, their names spoken in voices that hadn't existed for decades. Margaret fell to her knees, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "It's not over," she choked out. "It's still hungry." A chill ran through them as the realization set in. Names had weakened the faceless man, but fire wouldn't kill what wasn't truly alive. Some horrors couldn't be destroyed, only escaped. Then Samuel pointed toward the iron gates. The town, it's watching. Through the smoke, figures emerged from Ashbury's sleepy streets, men and women in nightclothes, their faces slack with something between fear and reverence. The butcher, the schoolteacher, the mayor, they had known. They had always known. Miss Voss's final words echoed in Thomas's mind. Everything depends on this. Eliza's fingers tightened around the journal's remains. We have to keep running, she said. They'll blame us for this. They'll say we set the fire. A murmur rose from the gathering crowd. Torches were lit. The children exchanged a single understanding glance. Then they ran, not toward the town, but into the dark embrace of the woods beyond, where the trees grew thick and the moonlight couldn't reach. Behind them, the orphanage groaned its final death rattle, and somewhere in the smoke, something watched them go. Years bled into decades, but the memory of that night never loosened its grip on Eliza's soul. Now an old woman with silver-streaked hair and hands that still trembled in the dark, she stood before the ruins of Ashbury Heights Orphanage. The town had tried to erase it, boarding up the scorched remains, spreading rumors of unstable foundations, pretending the whispers in the woods were just the wind. But the earth remembers, and so did she. Her cane crunched on broken glass as she stepped through the skeletal remains of the entrance hall. The fire had eaten most of it, but here and there, fragments survived. A twisted bed frame, the headmistress's brass nameplate blackened with soot, a single child's shoe, tiny and impossibly preserved. She didn't come for closure. She came because of the dreams. The same dream every night. Thomas, Samuel, and Margaret standing in the orphanage courtyard, their faces still young, their clothes still torn from that final night. They never spoke. They only pointed to the cellar door. And last night, for the first time, Peter had been with them. Her breath fogged in the autumn air as she approached the cellar stairs. The townsfolk had sealed it long ago with thick chains and a rusted padlock, but someone, or something, had broken them. The metal links lay snapped on the ground like dead snakes. From the darkness below, a sound drifted up, children laughing, not the joyful kind, the hollow, echoing kind that skitters down your spine and settles in your bones, the kind you hear in empty playgrounds at twilight. Eliza's pulse roared in her ears. She should leave. She should burn this place to the ground again. She should... A small, cold hand slipped into hers. She looked down. No one was there. But the laughter grew louder, and the cellar door creaked open. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell for more. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. See you in the next one. Bye for now.